We've been working on our space MMO for about 6, 7 days now. I haven't really kept close track of it because I've been working in my off hours. But let's go ahead and take a tour and figure out what we've actually done. So we've managed to implement, sort of the three core services: the item, the inventory, and the player service. And these are implemented right now in Python, and we can run them together with one command. And then we've also created basically a model app for a control panel that will allow us to interact with and edit the game data. So we basically have items, which are a nice little list. We can search for those items, and we just made an example item. I'm not saying that there's going to be like a Vorpal in this game at all. So we can show the item, and it will give us some information about the blueprint as well. It will show us a blueprint tree, which is all the items required to actually construct this particular item. So it needs copper, it needs steel, steel needs iron and carbon and stuff like that. And then we also have this materials list, which will give you an idea of how much it will actually take to make one unit of this. So if you have steel, it only takes 10 steel, and it only takes, 11 iron, and it only takes, 10 copper. And if you have these sort of things, then you can do those. But if you had to make it from complete scratch, this is what it would be. And this way you can figure out like how much it will take to make like 150. And part of the reason for this is that when you're designing your item, you want to make sure that it's like realistic levels. Like, can a player realistically achieve this, and how difficult is it going to be? Edit the item, so you can edit attributes for it. You can also edit the blueprint components. We have this sort of container item that we've created, and that's going to lead us over into the inventories. So inventories are things, and if you remember for this item, it's a 1039 is the ID, and we go over to inventories and we see that there's actually an inventory for item 1039. All right, so that particular item has an inventory, and that way, if a player or a mob possesses that particular item, they have access to the inventory, and then they can put things in, pull things out. Now we have players, and players like obviously possess a mobile, so we can sort of like see these things about them. So we can see their character information, and say this particular character, their character name is Emma, and we've also introduced like character attributes. So these are values between 0.001 and 1. So they're like really small numbers, to be quite honest, but these are just for making the math a little bit easier for doing stuff. And we've introduced like kind of some pretty typical ones like strength, luck, con, dex, but we also have this arcana and these operations. And if we go kind of like look in the code, things like arcanas relate to discovery, item info. Like we might have certain parts of item info might be hidden unless you have a high enough arcana to reveal it, so on and so forth. So, and also like revealing secrets or finding like secret things in the game, that might affect that. And then operations, this is kind of like the sci-fi sort of thing. This is like your repair, your scanning, equipment use, ship weapons, mining, and how that interacts. And the final feature that we have sort of like implemented so far is mobile, so NPCs. So we just kind of like generated some. These are not going to end up in the game, obviously, just test data. Pagination also works, so we've got quite a few of these, and we can sort of show them. And they also have, attributes to sort of decide what they can do. All of this was designed and implemented by Claude. I have gone in manually and had to fix some bugs because there are some complicated bugs and interactions that Claude just kind of like doesn't quite get it, and so you got to go in and fix it. But for the most part, creating a CRUD app is totally up his alley. And again, like a game is ultimately like there are some aspects of a game which are difficult programming problems when it comes to like game mechanics, but for the most part, there a lot of them are solved. But game programming is really an asset production problem. Or sorry, creating a game is largely an asset production problem. So how do you produce assets? How do you create enough NPCs? How do you create levels? How do you create worlds? How do you create meshes? And how do you put that into a pipeline and solve it? So what we're doing here, what I'm showing you is actually a game engine in a large sense, which is that this is how you kind of like organize all the stuff to put it into your game. And then the final thing is like, how do you package up your game? And that's a lot of what a game engine actually is doing. We've started off creating like a to-do list. In fact, we have one, default attributes. This one we're going to go ahead and say that one's done. That one is done as well. We've done that. So there we go. So we have some to-dos that I identified like earlier today. Like here are the things that we're gonna have to do, and we're just gonna see if we finish these today. We finish those today. We've also uploaded everything to GitHub, so you can actually go look at the code. Like ultimately, the game probably won't be open source, but for right now, in the very early stages, it's kind of worthwhile to do that, and people can obviously like look at it if they want to, and get some ideas about how to make games. Obviously, like so much of this is going to get refactored towards the end. Like the idea that this code is going to look anything like what it's actually going to be in the end, like who knows? Like we might even end up like removing the thrift concept entirely and just generating code based on this sort of schema and then actually not using thrift like in the final like game server part, because maybe we don't want to use it. Like who knows, we have no idea. This is just like to get us bootstrapped and sort of have like an easy system to work with. Then remember we had like the Fiddler app. That's our Fiddler Thrift Service Explorer. So that's like a little application that we have there that Claude made for us. And then what we also added was the control panel. So this is a new one, and this is the sort of game database admin. And of course, Claude does these really nice little markdown MDs so that readmes so that we can do that. We have our gen folder, which is like the generated code from Thrift, and then the code that actually. And also, what I've done is I've started recording a lot of my prompts, so that you can like get an idea for like this is the prompt I used to generate the control panel. And it ended up not being great, so I ended up also adding some additional stuff like my reviews and problems that I encountered. And then eventually I kind of like went away from doing it this way because like this is really good, but I tried to do too much. Like when it came to the control panel, I ended up basically realizing that I had to just implement the items from end to end, just items. And then I had to go add inventories and add inventories end to end, the whole thing, and debug it. And it was a process. And then players, and then finally mobiles and stuff like that. So I eventually learned that like you can't say make me a control panel with these four things. You have to be like one thing at a time, because Claude does have a little bit of a problem handling really complicated tasks. The problem with Claude and the problem with AIs that I've sort of discovered is that there's like a level of understanding about a program or a feature or something like that that I have or that I would expect a certain sort of programmer to have that Claude just can't get there. There is just an extra level where you sort of see how all the pieces fit together, and then you realize, oh, it's actually the same. Like we don't have to do things too different. We can like reuse a lot of code. Claude doesn't do that. He has very slight variations in how he implements things, which can sometimes be a little bit frustrating. There can be like a few bugs. He has a bit of a problem with unions. When he loads them back out, like I had to go in and write this code because the way that he was doing it was just basically setting the value directly, which of course Thrift doesn't support, and it would throw like these really obscure errors. So he has a little bit of trouble with unions, just a tiny amount, but that's okay. Like we can go fix stuff like that. And this function definitely is not production ready by any stretch of the imagination. This is way too broad and might let people do stuff. But for right now, it's like okay. But eventually, we might actually have to like rewrite pretty much all of these, and see if whether or not we're going to rewrite it or whether or not we can get Claude to kind of understand the best way to do this. And a lot of things that we're going to need is like when people pass in values, we're going to have to definitely do some validation on those values and make sure that they're not just that they're sanitized, but that they're correct. Because we don't want to get to the point like we don't want to sanitize it and then have it execute a SQL query, even if the value was completely ridiculous. So we want to make sure that like we establish ranges and clamps and stuff like that, and that we reject early if someone has passed in a value that can't possibly be true. So that's something that we definitely kind of have to watch with Claude because there is like a level. He's really good at writing tests, generating tests and test data and test stubs. And as we've gone along, whenever we encounter a bug, I kind of try to get Claude to introduce a new test. And that's good. I don't know what I'm going to do when it comes to a testing framework. I'm kind of okay with the way it is now. It's very hand done, but because it's basically being interacted with Claude, that's not such a big issue. But I do wonder if maybe we should try to use some sort of like unit test system. Maybe we'll think about it, but for right now, it's kind of okay. I do kind of want him to maybe refactor this a little bit to sort of reuse stuff, but that would just be the same thing that would happen if we would use like a unit test framework. And we can just pick one to use, and he probably would be totally fine with it. So if you remember in the early days of this project, we drew like a picture and we had like a client and a load balancer and stuff like that. So actually, we have Bootstrap, and then we also have some seeds. Now, but this is kind of like what things are looking like, right? Run service runs these three different services, and then control panel is actually using these. So here's a important kind of like point or a little bit of a hack. So the control panel is actually as much as possible going through the actual game services that we're going to be deploying. And this allows us to dog food the game services and like incrementally improve them while we're going through the development of the game. So that when it's time to build the client that's actually going to be connecting through to these services, we have much more robust services than we thought about, all the different things that need to be done. And of course, this is kind of like completely not the end here, because obviously we're going to have to create the ability for these services to be running in groups of services. So like mini item services, mini inventory services. And then we'll also have to be deploying, I don't know, I talked about the tube connecting these services to each other to make sure that they're up to date. We're going to have to add in a few more services like an auth service. So how we can authorize these players. So player service will probably the player service is like for finding stuff about players and doing things about players. Um, and then we're probably going to have like an authorization service that will keep track of like auth tokens and who's authenticated and who needs to be logged out and all that kind of stuff. And then another thing that the auth service is going to have to do is we're going to have to implement some kind of permission system. So we also want to control we want to protect all these services from the players doing things that they shouldn't be able to do in a larger game sense, like as a company or as like a game outside of the actual gaminess of it. So we want to control that. But then also inside of the game, we want players to be able to have different access controls for like maybe we're going to have bases so people can build a base and who can access the base and who can access inventories and who can access equipment. Can people hold your sword and stuff like that? So we want to be able to create like an access control list kind of like system that will work for players so that players can grant permissions and also we can have like these larger scale kind of access control lists about what aspects of the different services can they access. And yeah, that's kind of what we've got so far.